This is TWiT.
All right, you have earned your brown liquor pick of the week.
Back of the book,
Mr. Richard Campbell.
So, still moving in here, like I rearranged the cellar this weekend. And one of the things that happened was I dug through a couple of boxes of whiskey that I had for a while. And one of them was this Bowmore 15. Who knew?
I think that's a very good whiskey.
It's a very nice whiskey. And it's a 1 liter bottle, too. It's the big one.
Oh,
so,
nice.
Probably a birthday present.
Does it have a handle?
Nope, not
Okay.
not
My
a
mom wouldn't
handle.
want it then.
But it is a liter. So, normally I would get the 750. This is, of course, an Islay. And that's the southernmost island of the Inner Hebrides, about 20 miles by 25 miles long. There's about 3,000 people who live on that island today. It's had a storied history of all sorts of things. An amazing place. There are really only 3 areas on Islay where whiskey is made. There's up in the northeast, close to Jura, where Bunab, Ardennau, and Cowela are made. Down in the southeast, which is what most of the time when you see photographs of Islay, that's what you see. That's Ardbeg, Lagavulin, Lefroy, Port Ellen. There's a new distillery under construction there called the Port Untruan, which is owned by Elixir. And then where Bowmore is, which is Lochendal. So if you see a picture of Islay, you'll see that there's a bay in the south, and in there is where you'll see Bowmore, Brookladdock, and Port Charlotte, which hasn't been open for forever, but is still a famous and popular distillery. Lochendal is a saltwater loch. It's quite shallow and rocky, so it's not meant for big ships. There's a bit of a corridor cut through to the dock at Brookladdock, but other than that, shallow water boats, fishing boats, that kind of thing. During World War II, RAF Coastal Command stationed their flying boats there to protect convoys from submarines. And, of course, all things, when it comes to Islay, they're known for their peated whiskeys. That wasn't always true. Peated whiskeys used to not be very popular, but I've told the story before, when we talked about Lagavulin, when United Distillers did their classic malt series in 1988, and Lagavulin was the only of one of the Islas that was on there, and it was peated, and it was not expected to sell well, and it sold huge, and essentially started the peated movement. I think when you think about the timing, then that sort of Gordon Gekko-ish, peated whiskey and cigars go well
good.
together.
I think I remember that from the movie. Yes.
Yeah. That if you like a cigar, you're going to like a peated whiskey. And one of the reasons I have Bowmore out is that it's barbecue time, and I've been smoking ribs and salmon and all sorts of things. And when I've got a lot of smoke going around me, I like smoking my whiskey as well. Most of the time I don't drink peated whiskey, but this is the time of year where, peat works for me. And so I was happy to find that Bowmore and crack it open and enjoy it. And so I thought I'd tell the story. You'll see right on the bottle, it says established 1779 by a guy named John Simpson. There's no evidence that he actually made whiskey in 1779. That seems like a marketing play. The first license taken by Simpson to sell whiskey was in 1816. But if you use a 1779, then you get to call yourself one of the oldest running distilleries in Scotland, and likely the oldest running in Islay as well. Not that he kept it for forever. It was sold to the Mutter family out of Glasgow in the 1830s. They were whiskey blenders and very successful ones who held on to it for the better part of 100 years. It shut down during World War I, and coming out of the war and into Prohibition, the Mutter sold it off to another company in 25, and then it changed hands again in 50. The one that everybody knows really is formed in 63 when Stanley Morrison buys it with a group of partners to create Morrison's Bowmore Distillery. And that's sort of a key time for Bowmore. When you talk about buying a $10,000 bottle of Bowmore, which, I talk about all the time, you're talking about a 1960s edition from the Morrison era. And it stayed that way until Suntory started getting involved in 1989. So that's around the time of United Distillers and so forth. And Suntory took complete control of Bowmore in 1994. So that's sort of the evolution of the company per se. By the way, they have a great tour. It's beautiful. And in fact, if you are all in on the whiskey thing, they have a set of workers' cottages from the 1800s that you can rent if you want to hang out there.
Do you have to drive there in Aston Martin? Apparently you do.
They have a big deal with Aston Martin. So yes, there's a lot of Aston going on there.
Oh, you get a chauffeur-driven tour of the island in Aston.
And it's not a huge place, and it's very beautiful. I mean, Scotland is tough terrain. This is a southern more part of Scotland, but beautiful spot. There's no bridges onto Islay. You have to take a ferry.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
I have talked about Bowmore before when I was doing the Scottish series back in the day, and on 818, I mentioned Bowmore because we were talking about malting, and one of the things that Bowmore promotes is the fact that they still do floor maltings to this day. So they buy barley off of Islay and they actually malt it themselves. Their normal process is they only peat it after it's malted, so it's turned green, it's starting to sprout. Then they dry it, and the first 18 hours of drying, they do with peat, and then there's an additional 40 something hours with just heat because you don't want too much peat in. This is not a heavily peated whiskey. But to be honest, these guys make way too much whiskey. They make millions of liters of whiskey a year. And so there's no way they're doing that all in Bowmore. And the reality is that they buy the vast majority of their barley already ground to specification and peated to specification like everybody else. But they maintain a small amount of floor malt still because they just don't have the room to do anything more. Their water comes from the River Lagan, which runs through the center of Islay and drains into Lochindal. They do a relatively short fermentation, only 48 hours or so. They have 6 wooden washbacks, about 40,000 liters each, and 2 wash stills and 2 spirit stills, relatively small, 20,000 liters for the wash stills, 12,000 liters for the spirit stills. Their new make typically comes in at 69%, but of course they barrel at 63.5%. because they almost exclusively do their initial barrelings in used bourbon casks. And as we know, I hope you memorize this because there will be a test, the Americans barrel at 62.5 when they make bourbon. And so the Scots have learned to go in at 63.5 to pull additional flavors from those used bourbon casks.
More.
That 1% makes all the difference. Their warehouses, they mostly use dunnage warehouses. That's the dirt floor, side rack, 3 high. They have 1 racked warehouse, so the pallet style warehouse, which I think they do their finishing in primarily. And in the case of the 15, they do 12 years in bourbon and 3 years in sherry. The question here, and the one that hit me when I was looking at this particular bottle, is what's up with the 15 versus the 12 or the 18? Like, you see that pattern a lot. So I went and dug around for a while. And there's a lot of distilleries that make like a 12 and a 15 and an 18, and then a 20-something. Many of them make a 21. In the case of Bowmore, they make a 25. Like on the Spey, Fiddick, Dalmore, Macallan, Livet, they all do a 12, 15, 18, 21. Farkless does everything. They make all kinds of things, right? When you talk about the islands, Highland Park, 12, 15, 18, 21. Bowmore, 12, 15, 18, 25. Caol Ila, Lefroy. Even in the lowlands, Auchentoshan does it. Glendronach does it. Like, there's a lot of different distilleries that follow this pattern of the 12, the 15, the 18, and then a 20-something. But why? Why would you do this? Like, what's the big deal? If you look at it from a pricing perspective, 12-year-olds are very tightly priced together. In the US dollars, you'll find them between $60 and $75 across the board these days, which is up. Right? It didn't used to be this expensive, but things cost more these days. The spread's a little bit bigger when you get to 15s, so $75 to $150. The 18s, the spread gets bigger now, $125 on the low side, up to over $300 on the high side.
I want the Bowmore Black from 1960. Wait a minute, there's one as old as me.
Yeah. Bowmore's been making whiskey for a long time, man. And if you've got an urge to spend the price of a house on whiskey, they are willing to help you.
But would it be better?
That is the question, Leo. Why am I talking about this?
This
12,
is the smartest
15, 18,
thing Richard has ever
20.
said to me. I'm sorry to interrupt, but like I know exactly where you're going with this, and this is the greatest knowledge you will ever get.
Okay, tell us.
Yeah.
Is it better with age? Does it get better with age?
Up to a point, right? Like, I've drank a lot of different whiskeys, and some 20s are great, some are not. I've never met anything older than a 20, and I've tried 40s. I've even tried a 50. No.
What happens if, like, God help you, if it is the best thing you ever drank?
Well, now you're talking about something else, because
now,
I've had this experience. Yeah,
like now this thing is,
I met a Centenary bottle that was like $15,000 for the bottle. I wanted $750 a shot, and I didn't try it because there was no good outcome. Right. $750 for a shot. If you don't like it, you blew $750. If you do like it, you want a $15,000 bottle of whiskey, and you're about to get divorced. Right? Like, don't go there.
So
Awful.
What would your recommendation be? The 15?
Well, it depends. Listen, the reason they cost more mostly is because the market will bear for more. And the reason they follow the same patterns is because they've educated the public to expect more from a higher price bottle.
Well, and
it does cost more to store it longer, right? There's a few things that are going on here. The longer a barrel stays in a rack, the less alcohol that's in it. So, the 12-year, a given barrel of 12-year-old produces a lot more whiskey, like 10, 20% more than the 15-year-old. And then the 18-year-old, like, you literally are going to get less whiskey per barrel. So that costs something. You are paying for maintenance and storage and so forth. Also, the barrels are individually insured. So the longer you store that barrel, the more likelihood there's something wrong with it. So the insurance costs more. Like, there's a bunch of things that add up here. But it's mostly what the price will bear. Here's the other thing that's going to get you, that'll surprise you when you talk about, like, let's talk about the 12, 15, the 18, and the 25 of Bowmore, all of which I've had, including the 25, which, by the way, is on YouTube. If you search well on YouTube, and I'll give you the key thing to search for, which is Drunk Kitchen, you will see me pouring a Bowmore 25. They're not made the same. So the Bowmore 12, which is I think I looked on Total Wine, it was $68 US right now. It's a 40%. It's peatier than the other ones because it hasn't been aged as long. But the peat comes in at the beginning on the grain. It doesn't come from the barrel. So the longer it spends in the barrel, the milder the peat gets. And for the most part, Bowmore 12 is only aged in bourbon. It looks like it does a finish in sherry, maybe 6 months, 9 months. That's about it. But Bowmore doesn't need to tell us. The 15 we've already talked about. This is about a $120 bottle of whiskey, 43%, which is relatively low, but this is chill filtered and colored for consistency's sake. So that's why they can be so low. They don't worry about flocculation. 12 years in bourbon, 3 years in sherry. That's the clearest one. The 18, so now you're jumping up to about $175 for the bottle. Same ABV. They are quite clear about saying it's made only in bourbon. And then finally, the 25, which, if you can find one, is a $640 bottle of bourbon, of whiskey. Again, still 43%. They do say it was aged in sherry. They don't say how long. The thing to know is that when a distillery lays up a barrel, so clear spirit goes into a barrel, that's not like they know, 18 years from now, this is going to be awesome. They don't know. Right? Every year, the weather's a little different. The location the barrel stays, affects things. This thing's right by the ocean, so it's going to have a certain amount of salt. Like, they have to sample it. And if it falls below 40%, they can't sell it. So often, if it's losing alcohol too fast, they'll get rid of it to somebody else, to one of the specialty bottlers, rather than try and keep it in their own lines. And you don't know when it's going to be good, when it's going to be great, or when it's going to be the flavor profile. So often they're not happy with the barrel, so they'll lay it up for longer. So most of the time, these older barrelings, they've been laid up because they didn't surface as the product they would sell the most of, the 12s or the 15s. So you got to think in the terms of somewhere around year 11 of a bunch of barrels being laid up. They're tasting them and going, you know what? This set is going to work well for 12. Do their finishes in the sherry and send them on their way. These ones, we're not quite happy with it. Let's finish out the 12 and then we'll kick them over to sherry. At the 12 mark, you're still not happy with it. You don't want to put it in the sherry yet. So maybe that's going to be 18 barrels. So you leave them lay for longer to see if they're going to turn around. Right? In some ways, these older and older editions, they're all the problem children, right? Like, they weren't doing well. And so they kept them for longer. It's not like they knew this thing's just going to get better every time. They don't know. And they charge a lot for it. Now, back to Leo's real question. Where's the value?
No, I just want a good... I'm not sure. Is value the right way to put it? I'm not a value drinker.
Yeah.
I just want to know if I get
bang for the
buck. So with wine, with brandy, with sherry, with port, age often equals a better.
Yeah, but not always.
Not always. But
none of these are bad. Like, let's be clear. The 12 is peatier. right?
See,
Like,
that
without
I
a
would
doubt.
like to pay to get rid of.
Right. And look, and if you're after
Right.
peat, go get an Ardbeg 10. Like, that's like licking a forest fire. You're going to have all the peat you ever need, right? The 15 with its extra years in sherry, it's twice the price of the 12. But pretty damn good drink. So the 18, now you're adding 50% on the price again. And for the same volume. You know, that's going to be smoother and lighter still.
So it does get smoother with age. I guess that's the question I was asking.
But
it does something.
But
does
if you were
happen with
after
age.
smoothness, go get a Dalmore 12.
Right.
Right? Like the whole thing is you were there. You didn't buy a Bowmore because you didn't want peat. So what are you doing? Right.
Yeah. Good point.
And now, why did I have a 25 and why did it end up on YouTube? And like, you guys can figure that out and we'll do a test later. Again, it was a gift, you know, a friend of mine for a
It's
major
not a bribe
birthday.
if it's given ahead after the favor.
There you go.
Yeah.
Now, but look, is this peated? You're darn right. This is peated. This is peated whiskey. It's not a poke in the face peat, but it's like, no, there's smoke in there, and I've been smoking ribs, so I want smoke, right?
Yeah,
Do
I
you
guess
wake up
that's
in the
right,
morning
yeah.
smelling like smoke? That's all I'm asking. You know, it's like
Yes.
if you've been sitting
So
around a campfire all night.
The day after I smoke ribs, the next morning when I take a shower, I smell the kickery smoke again.
Yeah,
right? It all comes
that's-
out.
you know,
there and
that's-
then.
yeah.
My wife
You lay
loves
down
it
in a
when I
pillow
smoke.
and then you roll over and you can smell it in the pillow.
Yeah,
and you're
no,
like, oh, what have I
Lisa,
done?
Lisa says that's the best perfume is a smoker's
It's
smell.
the smoke.
Not smoking cigarettes or cigars,
No.
but
Yeah.
you know,
No, hickory. I do the
smoke.
ribs in hickory, and I do the salmon and alder. I've done some pork shoulders with applewood.
do you do it
know.
on a plank or the salmon?
No. The
right on the grill.
planking is a different thing. I'm actually talking about a proper hot smoke, so alder wood, and
How long?
it takes 45 minutes to hot
pretty
smoke.
quick. Okay.
Yeah. It's just not cold smoke. Cold smoke's a different thing. Then you're curing the fish, and
Yes, that's
you gotta
what
be
I
more
like.
careful.
I like
Yeah,
the
but making
cures.
lox takes more time.
Yeah, so good.
I got the rig for it, but she usually shows up with a side of sockeye and it's
know
like,
what?
smoke this.
Let's wrap this show. It's time for gas station sushi, and I'm in the mood.
Yeah. Speaking of smoke, I like my salmon with a little touch of diesel.
Little diesel flavor.
It's pretty good when you get it when it's fresh. No, it isn't. No, it isn't.
Anyway, I mean, I wanted to talk about the aging, this aging behavior, just to recognize that it's not that it's a scam. You're definitely getting different products. You're not buying it because you're getting a huge value for the money. That's not the case.
I like Wojo's remarks. It's like binning.
I thought that was good.
CPUs, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
A lot of
It's
ways.
like the binning of whiskey. That's good
Yeah.
stuff.
Well, and I've
Whiskey
spent
in a
time with
bin.
the barrel guys, and that's sort of the reality of it. Like, and the funny thing is, the anxiety gets up as it gets older, where it's like, I'm going to have to kick this over to Cooper's Green or to Gordon MacPhail, which I'm going to get wholesale price for versus I can get the retail price for this. Although, admittedly, you know, when you look at it at $150 for a bottle of whiskey, how much of that is going to the guy who made it? It's like 20%. You know, even here in British Columbia, the markup for commercial whiskey, and I think I talked about this when we were talking about the craft whiskey thing, 125%. Right? Governments take a huge chunk of the price of alcohol. Yeah. Anyway, I get to drink whiskey at my job. It's good. Should you buy this? Absolutely. It's one of the nicer peats. It's not a big peat, right? Like if you want a big peat, get the Lagavulin. If you really want big peat, get an Ardbeg. If you're insane, you'll get an Octomore. Don't do that. But with a cigar, which I don't do. I don't smoke anything except meat. With a cigar, these things are fantastic. And around a barbecue, absolutely. It's, like I said, it's very seasonal for me. And don't worry, I found weirder stuff in my cellar when I reorganized it. So I've got a couple of weeks of things sitting here now. We're going to go strange places from here. This was the normalest thing I found in those.
I'm excited. I am really excited. Richard Campbell. We actually, Kevin King, our producer and editor, made a whole series on YouTube of Richard's Whiskey Talk, which we do at the end of every show. And there's
Which I think we've established is kind of mailing in a little bit lately. Is that what the point was last week?
I don't think he's.
I'm kidding. I'm
in.
kidding.
I think it's all good.
Yeah.
It's all delicious. Even the Jack. I like it all.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm having an experience too. You know, I came into this thinking I knew my way around whiskey, but a couple of years of hanging with you guys and doing this every week, I see whiskey differently now.
Oh, that's really good.
do.
I like that
that's
you're
great.
obsessed about this, like the way I'm obsessed about like Windows 11 updates. You know, like we all have our own little.
I did not show you the graphs I made of the pricing of 12, 15, and 18s. Like I got to a point where late at night I looked at it and said, this 3 hours qualifies for one sentence. Gone.
Yeah. Well, you got to put the time in. That's part of it.
I pulled the numbers together.
He's got more of those whiskey clips coming. So thank you,
great.
Kevin, for doing that.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's really fantastic.